are accustomed to thinking that we know everything about 1986, the explosion, radiation, evacuation. But what if the most terrifying pages of this story were deliberately torn out of the KGB reports? Welcome to Night Nook. Today, we are pulling a folder marked Top Secret out of the archives. Make yourself comfortable in our corner. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next investigations. And right now, like this video. Let YouTube's algorithms know that we are not afraid of the truth. While we get started, write in the comments, do you think the exclusion zone should remain a closed monument to tragedy or become a tourist center? I read every opinion.
It is often said that history is written by the victors. But in the Soviet Union, history was written by the silent. It was written in red ink, stamped with the words Sovershенно Sekretno, top secret. And then it was buried. Make yourself comfortable, lock the door, turn off the lights. Tonight, we are not going to a fantasy world. We are going to a place that exists right now, roughly 100 kilometers north of Kyiv, a place where the trees are red, where the water is heavy, and where time stopped in April 1986. But the story I am going to tell you isn't the one you saw on HBO. It isn't the story of the explosion, at least not yet. Tonight, we are opening the Kyiv archives. In recent years, the Security Service of Ukraine declassified thousands of KGB documents regarding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. These papers were never meant to be seen by civilian eyes. They smell of stale tobacco, bureaucracy, and fear. They reveal a terrifying truth. The disaster didn't start on April 26th. It started years before the first brick was even laid.
Let's go back, not to 1986, but to 1979. Imagine the pride of the Soviet Union. The atom is peaceful. The atom is a worker. In the town of Pripyat, roses are being planted. Young couples are moving into high-rise apartments. It is a utopia, the city of the future. But inside the gray offices of the KGB, a man, let's call him Agent Yuri, is typing a report. He is part of the KGB's specific department assigned to monitor strategic objects. Agent Yuri is worried. We have the actual document here. KGB report dated January 17th, 1979, 7 years before the world breaks. The report details that the construction of the infamous Reactor Unit 2 is already compromised. The concrete is too porous. There are gaps in the plating. The steel deliveries from the Zhadanov factory are defective. Agent Yuri writes, there are deviations from the design. The monolithic covering is fracturing. Do you understand what that means? The sarcophagus that was supposed to hold the demon in was cracked before the demon was even born. But here is the horror of the Soviet machine. Yuri files the report. It goes up the chain of command. A stamp is pressed onto the paper, and then silence. To fix the concrete means to delay the construction. To delay the construction means to miss the quota. To miss the quota means to shame the party. So the cracks remain. The plant opens. The ribbons are cut. The champagne flows. And the KGB watches, silently documenting every flaw, every leak, every close call. The archives reveal that between 1971 and 1981, there were actually 29 emergency shutdowns at the plant. 29. Most were due to electrical failures or pump malfunctions. The staff at the plant were nervous. They knew they were driving a car with bad brakes, but they were told to drive it at maximum speed. 1982, a crisp September day. Reactor Unit 1. Most of the world believes the first radiation leak was in '86. That is a lie. In September 1982, a fuel assembly melted down in Unit 1. Radioactive aerosols were released into the atmosphere. It drifted over Pripyat. It drifted over the playground where children were spinning on the merry-go-round. The KGB response? We have the memo. Prevent the spread of panic and rumors. The city was not washed, the people were not warmed, the reactor was patched up, and the report was filed into the deep archives. It was a rehearsal for the apocalypse, and nobody in the audience noticed.
Now, fast forward. It is 1986. The winter has been long, but spring is coming. In the archives, there is a distinct change in the tone of the documents leading up to April. There is a sense of exhaustion. The plant is understaffed. The operators are overworked. They are planning a safety test. A test to see if the turbines can spin long enough to power the pumps in case of a blackout. It is ironic, isn't it? They destroyed the world trying to prove how safe they could be. The date is set, April 25th. But there is a delay. Kyiv calls. Wait, they say. We need the electricity for the grid. Don't turn off the reactor yet. So the reactor waits. It sits at half power for hours, a poisoned state. Xenon gas, the invisible poison of nuclear physics, begins to build up in the core. The reactor is becoming sleepy, unstable, and angry.
The night shift arrives. Akimov and Toptunov, young men. Toptunov is only 25. He has a mustache, he's smart, he has his whole life ahead of him. He walks into the control room, unaware that he is walking into his own tomb. The archives contain transcripts of the phone calls from that night. They are mundane. They talk about data, about valves. There is no horror in their voices, only routine. 1:23 a.m. The test begins. The power plummets. The reactor stalls. They try to pull it back up. They pull the control rods out. All of them. They are stripping the armor off the beast.
1:23:40. The button is pressed. AZ5. The emergency scram. It is supposed to drop all the rods and stop the reaction instantly. But remember the report from 1979? The design flaws? The tips of the rods are made of graphite. Graphite increases reactivity. For a split second before they help, they hurt. It is the detonator. 1:23:45. The roof of Unit 4, weighing 1,000 tons, is thrown into the night sky like a coin. The core is open. The air glows. And the first phone call is made, not to the government, but to the fire station. Hello? Is this the fire station? We have a fire on the roof. Yes, the roof is asphalt. It's burning. They didn't know. They thought it was a simple fire. They were driving their trucks into a beam of ionization 400 times stronger than Hiroshima. The archives are now open. The lid
is off. Let's look inside.
Silence. After the noise, after the shudder of the earth, there was a strange, terrible silence. Inside Control Room 4, the air was thick with dust. Not just dust, pulverized concrete. It hung in the light of the emergency lamps. Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer, stood in the center of the room. He was a hard man, a man of rules, and his mind could not accept what his eyes were seeing. The gauges showed 0. The control rods were stuck. The men were shouting that the reactor was gone. Dyatlov looked at them and said, "You are confused. The reactor is intact. We are cooling it." This is the moment where the tragedy turned into a crime. The archives show us the logs. For hours, they pumped water into a crater that didn't exist. They were pumping water onto a thermonuclear fire, creating steam that carried the poison higher and higher into the night sky.
2 trainees, Proskyuyakov and Kudryatsev, were sent to the reactor hall to manually lower the rods. They ran through corridors filled with water and steam. When they reached the hall, they stopped. They looked up. There was no roof. They could see the stars. And inside the reactor pit, they saw the red glow. Not fire, but the air itself ionizing. A column of ethereal light shooting into the atmosphere. They returned to the control room. They were already dying. Their faces were turning a dark brick red, nuclear tan. They told Dyatlov, "The core is gone." Dyatlov replied, "You saw wrong." The first report sent to Moscow is in the files. It is a masterpiece of fiction. It reads, "Reactor intact. Radiation levels 3.6 roentgens per hour." Why 3.6? Because that was the maximum limit of the small dosimeters they had on hand. The needle hit the edge and stopped. They didn't think the machine is maxed out. They thought the radiation is 3.6. The real number was 15,000. It is like standing inside a blast furnace and measuring the temperature with a fever thermometer. The sun rose on Saturday, April 26th. It was a beautiful day, warm. The apricot trees were blossoming. In the city of Pripyat, 3 kilometers away, the town woke up. This is the part of the story that hurts the most. The normalcy. KGB intercepts of telephone conversations from that morning paint a haunting picture. "Hey, Lena, are we still going to the river today? The weather is perfect." "I don't know. Look out the window. Do you see the smoke at the plant? It's just a fire. They'll put it out. Come on, bring the vodka." By 10 a.m., the children were playing in the sandboxes. There was a wedding procession moving down Lenin Avenue. The bride wore white. The groom wore a suit. They took photos near the bridge. The wind was blowing from the reactor directly onto them. The archives mention a specific physical sensation reported by dozens of residents that morning. A metallic taste, like sucking on a battery. It was radioactive iodine settling on their tongues. Mothers wiped yellow dust off their windowsills with wet rags, rinsing the cloth in the sink. That dust was pure graphite from the core. While the children played, a special truck arrived at the plant gates. Inside was General Pikolov.
He knew the 3.6 reading was a lie. He put on a hazmat suit and drove the truck straight toward the destroyed reactor. He rammed the truck through the debris until he was close enough. He looked at the military-grade sensor. It didn't say 3.6. It said the air was burning. Pikolov reversed the truck and drove back to the bunker. He walked into the room where the party officials were arguing. He threw the map on the table and said, "It isn't a fire. It is an open volcano." And still, they did not evacuate.
Saturday night fell. The city of Pripyat went to sleep. 160 apartment blocks, 50,000 people, sleeping with their windows open to catch the spring breeze. Inside the hospital, it was a different story. The firefighters who had been on the roof were there. We have the medical reports. They are gruesome. The sailors of the nuclear age. Their skin was blackening. They were vomiting. The nurses stripped off the firefighters' uniforms, the boots, the heavy jackets. They carried them down to the hospital basement and threw them in a pile. If you go to Pripyat today illegally and you sneak into the hospital basement, those clothes are still there. They are still highly radioactive. A pile of ghosts in the dark. Sunday morning, April 27th, 36 hours after the explosion. Finally, the order came from Moscow. Evacuate. But not run for your lives. No. That would admit failure. That would admit the Soviet atom was dangerous. They were told it was temporary. 1,200 buses appeared on the horizon, a line of steel stretching for 20 kilometers. At 2 p.m., the loudspeakers on the street corners clicked on. A woman's voice, calm, professional. Attention, comrades. Due to an unfavorable radiation situation at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, it is recommended to leave the city for 3 days. 3 days. They were told to take only their documents and some food. Don't bring your pets, the soldiers said. You'll be back on Wednesday.
And so they left. They left the dinner on the table. They left the laundry hanging on the balcony. They left the family dog waiting by the door. 50,000 people boarded the buses. The convoy moved slowly through the red forest. As they looked back, they saw the reactor. It was no longer just smoke. The military was now dropping sand and lead from helicopters. The sky was filled with choppers, like flies buzzing around a wound. By nightfall, Pripyat was empty. The traffic lights continued to change colors: red, yellow, green. The neon sign on the supermarket buzzed. The clocks on the walls ticked. But there was no one left to hear them. The city of the future had become a city of ghosts in a single afternoon. But the fire was still burning, and the radiation was not staying in Ukraine. It was drifting north. While the Kremlin tried to lock the secret in a box, the wind was carrying it to Sweden, to Germany, to the world. The secret was out, and now the liquidation had to begin. The archives call this next chapter the Biorobots.
May 1986. The city is empty. The birds have stopped singing, but the zone is more alive than ever. The Soviet Union mobilized. It was not a cleanup operation. It was a war without bullets, fought against an enemy that could penetrate steel armor. They called them liquidators. 600,000 men. Soldiers, reservists, miners, bus drivers. They were pulled from their lives in Moscow, Kyiv, Minsk. The archives contain their draft notices. Some volunteered, believing they were saving the world. Others were told, go or face the tribunal. They arrived in a landscape that defied logic. The leaves on the trees had turned a rusty blood-red color, the red forest. If you stood there for 10 minutes, your white blood cells would begin to die. So they bulldozed the forest. They buried the trees in trenches. They buried the earth in the earth. But the biggest problem was not the trees. It was the monster itself. The scientists feared a second explosion. The molten core, the corium, was burning through the concrete floor. Below it lay the bubbler pools, millions of gallons of water. If the lava hit the water, steam explosion. A thermal blast that would vaporize the remaining 3 reactors and leave Europe uninhabitable for centuries. They needed to freeze the ground beneath the reactor. They needed a heat exchanger. But how do you build under a melting nuclear core? You call the coal miners. From Tula and the Donbass they came, tough men, men who lived in the dark. The archives describing the tunnel operation are suffocating just to read. They dug a 150-meter tunnel by hand. No machines. The machines broke down in the radiation. It was 50 degrees Celsius, 122 Fahrenheit, inside the tunnel. The air was poison. They had no respirators. They had no protective suits. The documents note that the miners eventually took off their clothes. They worked naked, digging sideways into the earth, just meters below the most radioactive object on the planet. One miner is quoted in a declassified interview. "They gave us masks, but you couldn't breathe in them, so we took them off. We drank vodka to wash the dust from our throats. We knew we were dead men, but we had a job to do." They finished the tunnel in 1 month. It should have taken 3. Tragically, the lava never melted through. The cooling pad was never used. They dug their own graves for nothing. But they didn't know that. They were the only thing standing between us and extinction.
While the miners worked below, a different tragedy was unfolding on the surface. The families had left, but the animals remained. Thousands of dogs and cats, locked in apartments or roaming the empty streets of Pripyat. They were waiting. The soldiers were given orders. Sanitation. It is a cold word for a heartbreaking task. Special squads were formed. They were given rifles and crates of vodka. The archives detail the psychological trauma of these men. One report describes a soldier who broke down. He said the dogs didn't run away. They ran toward the soldiers. They thought the humans had come back to feed them. They were wagging their tails. We will not dwell on the details, but know this: the silence of Pripyat was not natural. It was man-made. Summer 1986, the final hurdle. To seal the reactor, to build the great sarcophagus, they had to clear the roof of Unit 3 and Unit 4. The explosion had thrown chunks of graphite onto the neighboring roofs. This graphite was the heart of the reactor. To stand near a piece for 3 minutes was fatal. The Soviets tried everything. They sent Soviet robots.
The radiation fried their motherboards instantly. They bought robots from Japan and Germany. The Joker, a sleek German police robot. They lowered it onto the roof. It moved a few meters. Then it stopped. The radiation was so intense, it scrambled the electronic brains. The general in charge looked at the dead machine and said, "The robots are dead. We need robots that can think. We need biological robots. Bio-robots. Men."
This is the most intense chapter of the archives. 3,828 men were assigned to clear the roof. Here was the math. The radiation was 10,000 Röntgen. A human could absorb a lifetime limit of radiation in 90 seconds. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Imagine the scene. You are a young soldier. You are dressed in a suit of handmade lead armor. Lead sheets strapped to your chest, your back, your groin. You wear a lead mask with a small glass window. You weigh 60 pounds heavier. You stand at the door to the roof. A siren wails. An officer screams, "Go, go, go!" You run out. The light is strange. The radiation is so high it affects your eyes, creating phantom flashes. The air smells like ozone and garlic. You see a black block of graphite. It weighs 50 kilos. You grab it with your shovel. You run to the edge. You throw it into the gaping mouth of the destroyed reactor. 1 shovel, maybe 2. Then your time is up. The siren sounds again. You run back inside. You are vomiting before you even get your suit off. For 90 seconds of work, you are given a certificate and 100 rubles, and you are sent home. But the archives show the lies. The dosimeters were often rigged, or the officers would write down lower numbers to keep the men working. "You haven't hit your limit yet, comrade. Go again." Some men went onto the roof 5 times.
By October, the roof was clear. The sarcophagus was built. 400,000 cubic meters of concrete, 7,000 tons of metal, a tomb for the beast. The liquidators went home, but the war followed them. They began to get sick. Their teeth fell out. Their skin wouldn't heal. And when they went to the doctors checked the KGB files. The files said their dose was within normal limits. They were told it was stress. They were told it was radiophobia. The archives are full of letters from these men, writing to the Central Committee, begging for medicine, begging for recognition. Many received no reply. They saved Europe. They saved the world. And the world moved on. As 1986 turned to 1987, the plant grew quiet. The sarcophagus stood gray and ugly against the sky. Inside, the elephant's foot, the mass of corium, hardened. It remains there today, a toxic monument to human arrogance and human sacrifice. But there is one final chapter to this story: the reckoning, the trial. And the man who recorded the truth on cassette tapes before hanging himself in his apartment. Valery Legasov. The physical fire was out. The graphite was buried. But there was one fire left burning: the truth. In the Soviet Union, truth was a dangerous commodity. It was controlled, rationed, and modified. The Kremlin needed a villain. They couldn't blame the nuclear industry. They couldn't blame the RBMK reactor design, because that was the pride of Soviet engineering.
To admit the reactor was flawed would be to admit the state was flawed. So, they blamed the men. July 1987. The House of Culture in the city of Chernobyl, just outside the exclusion zone. They turned a community theater into a courtroom. On the stage, there were no actors. There were 6 men. Viktor Brukhanov, the plant director, Nikolai Fomin, the chief engineer, and Anatoly Dyatlov. The archives described the scene. It was hot. The windows were open. The flies were buzzing. The defendants sat in a cage, not a metaphorical cage, a literal iron cage like animals. The trial was swift. It was theater. The prosecutor shouted, "They broke the rules. They were reckless." And yes, they were. They were arrogant. They made mistakes. But the archives reveal what was not said in that courtroom. The defense attorneys were forbidden from mentioning the control rods. They were forbidden from mentioning the positive void coefficient, the fatal flaw that made the reactor unstable at low power. Dyatlov, skeletal and sick from radiation poisoning, argued with the judge. He tried to explain that the emergency stop button, AZ5, was actually a detonator. The judge told him to be silent. They were sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp. The state washed its hands. The case was closed. Or so they thought.
April 26, 1988, the second anniversary of the disaster. Valery Legasov, the scientist who had led the response, the man who had ordered the sand dropped from the helicopters, was sitting in his apartment in Moscow. He was a hero, but he was a broken man. He had seen the archives. He knew the reactor design was still flawed. He knew there were 16 other RBMK reactors running across the Soviet Union, ticking time bombs waiting for a lazy operator. He had tried to publish the truth. The KGB had stopped him. They erased him from history. They denied him his title of Hero of the Socialist Labor. So, on that rainy night, Legasov made a choice. He didn't use a gun. He used his voice. He recorded 5 audio tapes. In them, he spilled everything: the secrets, the lies, the technical data, the names of the guilty parties in Moscow. He packed the tapes. He hid them. And then he hanged himself. His death was the loudest sound of the entire disaster. It forced the Soviet Union to face the mirror. Because of his suicide, the tapes were circulated among the scientific community. The design flaws were finally admitted. The other reactors were retrofitted. Legasov traded his life for the safety of the future. Now, let us leave the past. Let us step into the present. What is the Kiev Archive today? It is not just paper. It is a place. The exclusion zone, the 30-kilometer ring. If you go there now, it is quiet, but it is not dead. Nature has returned. Without humans to hunt them, the wolves have come back. There are bears swimming in the cooling ponds. Przewalski horses roam the fields where the radioactive fallout settled. The trees have reclaimed the city of Pripyat. Roots are growing through the floorboards of the school gymnasium. Moss covers the bumper cars. The forest is slowly eating the concrete. But do not be fooled by the greenery. The danger is still there.
Immersive,
Noir documentary. Bedtime story. Creepy, atmospheric, investigative. The Elephant's Foot. Deep in the basement of Unit 4, under the millions of tons of concrete, lies the corium, a mass of melted fuel, sand, and steel. It looks like a giant, wrinkled foot. In 1986, it was so radioactive that looking at it meant death. Today, it is still warm. It is still eating into the concrete foundation. It is a monster sleeping in the dark. And above it, the new safe confinement. A massive steel arch, the largest land-based moving structure ever built by mankind. It was slid over the old crumbling sarcophagus in 2016. It is designed to last 100 years. Just 100 years. The plutonium inside has a half-life of 24,000 years. We have built a tent over a volcano and hoped our great-grandchildren will figure out what to do next. The zone has its own culture now. The stalkers. Young people who sneak past the police checkpoints. They hike through the radiation-soaked forests at night. They sleep in the abandoned apartments of Pripyat. They drink vodka on the rooftops and watch the sunrise over the reactor. They say they go there to find silence, to escape the noise of the modern world. They say that in the zone, everything is honest. The radiation doesn't lie. It doesn't care about your politics or your money. It just is. Immersive, noir documentary, bedtime story, investigative. As we close the Kyiv archives tonight, what have we learned? The documents show us that Chernobyl was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of a system built on secrets. When you trade safety for quotas, when you trade truth for prestige, you create a debt. And sooner or later, that debt must be paid. The liquidators paid it with their blood. The citizens of Pripyat paid it with their homes. Legasov paid it with his life. We are still paying it. The particles released in 1986 are still in the soil of Europe. They are in the wood of the trees. They are a part of our planet's geology now. A thin layer of cesium-137 that will mark the human age for millions of years. The archives are now closed. The ghosts of Section 86 can rest for another night. Thank you for listening. Turn off the light. Listen to the silence in your room, and be grateful that it is just silence and not the clicking of a machine. Good night.